This is about his voting rights proposal, which essentially seeks to federalize elections, but he would say it seeks to make them more fair and protect voter rights. Your thoughts on his comments?
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack here. The first thing I would say is that even if some Democrats were sort of embarrassed by, you see that in some of their statements, a little bit embarrassed by how far the speech went, almost overcompensating, I guess, for the failures and things of that nature. So that kind of hyperbole actually backfires because people look at it and shake their heads. I would tell you that most of the people I've talked to on real earth, not Washington bubble, didn't even know that speech happened. Didn't even know that this was happening. Doesn't make it unimportant because they're trying to change the election law and have a federal takeover. But I think your point is the number one issue. Like if you went and asked people in this country, what are the top 10 things on your mind? This wouldn't even be on the top 50 because it's easier than ever to vote in America. It just simply is. And the numbers bear that out. So there's two things at play here. I think the first is a desire for power. They certainly view this as the perfect issue in which to break the filibuster. If there is no Senate filibuster, they not only can pass this voting bill, they can pack the Supreme Court, they can make DC a state. There's all kinds of things that they could do if there were no filibuster. And so number one, it's about that. And I think number two, frankly, is about politics. I think Chuck Schumer's afraid to get primaried in New York. AOC has not ruled out running for Senate against him. I think a lot of Democrats, but particularly Chuck Schumer in a state like New York, see that over the last few years, you've had longtime incumbents taken out by people from the far left, and they're concerned about it. Maybe he thinks he's still going to win, but doesn't want to go through that process. There's a tremendous amount of pressure coming from the base of the party, particularly radical elements of the base. And this month just happens to be the turn of those who are out there saying, that there's some sort of, as he called it, Jim Crow 2.0, which is absurd, and most Americans will tell you is absurd.
Can I ask you about politics? Because to me, the politics of this whole voting rights thing has not made any sense. Now, I am just a journalist, so I don't totally get it. But it was clear that he did not have the votes to get rid of the filibuster, either for a limited purpose, like he says, just to get the voting rights law through, or on a wider basis. And it was pretty clear he might not even have the votes for the voting rights legislation itself. Right. And yet he's running around saying, we're doing it, giving speeches. Chuck Schumer saying, I'm bringing it to a vote. It's happening. And then, of course, Kyrsten Sinema, this week is like, no, yeah, it's not happening. I'm not supporting you, a Democrat. Right. So they don't have the votes. They knew they didn't have the votes. So why were they making such a thing? It's like they did the same thing with Build Back Better. Like, we're going to do it. We've got it. And like Manchin was never on board. Why do they keep embarrassing themselves? This is an easy thing to avoid.
Yeah, there's a pattern in politics. So what happens is you win an election, you have a 50-50 Senate, a very narrow majority in the House, but your base, the most radical elements, the people who give you $50 a month online, who knock on doors, who make the phone calls, who, if they're not energized, you have no chance of winning elections. Those people think we have a mandate. And they say, okay, you won. It doesn't matter if you won by 1 vote, 1 point, or you won by 20. You won. And now we expect you to do all the things you promised. And so they go out there and they try to do these things, and they're not going to pass. But they're angry at them, and they're saying, well, at least try. You have to at least try. It happens in politics. It happens to both sides in some cases. You're not going to win something, but if you don't at least show you're fighting, then your base gets really angry at you. Then they get turned off. They won't show up. They won't give money, and you get destroyed because you can't win an election these days if your base is not energized. So that's what this is about. It's not just about Chuck Schumer personally. Think about how selfish this is. This he thinks may help fend off a primary challenge, but he has all these Democrats running in states that are somewhat vulnerable, and they're being put on the spot on this thing, and they're going to have to go out there now and take positions on it, and dividing his own conference over that. But it's all a base play because they have to be able to go to the base and say, we tried, we fought, but these two guys over here and the racist Republicans wouldn't let us move forward, and that's what this is. It's as simple as that.
They say, and I want to get to the accusations of racism because they're coming in by the minute against Kyrsten Sinema now and others. But they say, look, we have to have this new voting rights law because of January 6th, because the Republicans are trying to change laws across the nation to make it easier for the vote to be thrown out. And January 6th proved that, we need more federal control of how these things get certified and go down. There was a moment where you tried to address that rationale. We cut the soundbite because we found it kind of interesting. This is soundbite 5. I'm going to play it and then get you to add to it.
I think almost everyone would tell you that what happened on January 6th here was a terrible thing. It should never have happened, and it should never happen again. But I don't care how many candlelight vigils and musical performances you have from the cast of Hamilton. You're not going to convince at least most normal and sane people that our government last year was almost overthrown by a guy wearing a Viking hat and Speedos.
Okay. Well, they've issued their first arrest for a guy charged with, quote, sedition now. Does that change your opinion?
No, my opinion is that what happened on January 6th was a terrible thing. Crimes were committed on that day, and the people that are responsible for that should be charged, should be put on trial, and if convicted, should serve sentences for it. And I continue to believe that. I believed it from the moment it started. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your banner is. I don't care whose side you're on, who you voted for, whether you agree with me on issues or not. You can't do what happened on that day. You can't do it in the Capitol, and you can't do it in the 700 different riots that took place in the summer of 2020 across this country. You cannot do it. And those are crimes that need to be prosecuted, and people need to be put on trial and hopefully convicted for it. That is separate from the argument that somehow this was an orchestrated effort to overthrow the government of the United States of America. That just is not true. We were nowhere close to that. That was not going to happen. And so I think what happens is when you exaggerate these things, you lose credibility. When you lose credibility, then we lose the ability to analyze these things for what they truly are. And in many cases, you sort of empower the worst elements. You know, if you go around calling, if everyone is a racist, if that becomes just a throwaway line, and then you really can't call out the people that are racist or that are doing things that are race-based as a result of it. And it's the same thing with this. What happened that day, you don't have to be, and most people normal people are able to say what happened on the day was wrong and it shouldn't have happened. But it also isn't equivalent to Pearl Harbor, where the U.S. was pulled into a world war that ended up killing 3% of the global population. These are stupid things for people to say, particularly a vice president of the United States as an example.